Good day, everyone. Welcome to this basic science lesson. I'm Mr. Where I'll be your tutor for today. All right, basic science today, we'll be looking at living and non-living things. Living and non-living things. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to state the meaning of living and non-living things. You should also be able to give examples of living and non-living things. Most important, you should be able to identify, mention the characteristics of living things, and then you should be able to differentiate between plants and animals. And the last but not the least, you should be able to mention some importance of living and non-living things. Now, we'll start with the meaning of living things. What are living things? Living things are things that have life in them. Living things are those things that have life in them. For you to actually say something is living, it must have all the characteristics of life. It must have all the characteristics of life. If one characteristic is missing, that thing cannot be classified or said to be living. All right, since we know the meaning of living things now, what are some examples of living things? Some examples of living things in our environment are human beings. Both men and women are typical examples of living things. We also have goats, we also have sheep, we have bird, we have frog, we have mango tree, orange trees. All these things are examples of living things. And you will agree with each and every one of us here that the goats, the mango tree, the human beings, they are all living. They can move, they can breathe, they feed, and they also have all the characteristics of living things that we'll look into briefly. Now let's go over to the meaning of non-living things. What are non-living things? Non-living things are the direct opposite of living things. Non-living things are those things that do not have life in them. That means they do not have or share the characteristics of life. We'll go further to look at some examples of non-living things. Some examples of non-living things are pen, the book, the table on which the pen, the book, the laptop, the phone, the cup rests on. We also have a chair. All these things are examples of non-living things. If I ask you now, the chairs, do they breathe? You say no. Do they eat? No. Do they move without being pushed? No. So all these things are examples of non-living things. Let's move over to the characteristics of living things. Characteristics of living things or features of living things. Now, for us to be able to remember the characteristics of living things easily, for us to recall it with little or no stress, we'll have a mnemonic for it. And the mnemonic is Mr. Ninja Call. Mr. Ninja Call. The M in Mr., the M in MR, Mr. stands for movement, while the R stands for respiration. The N stands for nutrition, I for irritability, G for growth, E for excretion, R for reproduction. The call, that is C-A-L-L, the C stands for competition, the A, adaptation, L, limited size, and the last L for lifespan. These are all the characteristics of living things: movement, respiration, nutrition, irritability, growth, excretion, reproduction, competition, adaptation, limited size, and lifespan. You can recall all these characteristics by just remembering Mr. Ninja Call. So we'll look at all these characteristics one by one. All right, the first characteristic, the M, stands for movement. Now, movement is the ability of a living thing to move. Movement, the ability of a living thing to move. We can also say movement is a change in position or location of a body. A change in position simply means I'm like this right now, and then I raise up my hand a little. I'm changing the position of my hands. I tilt my head to one side. I'm changing the position of my head. What of changing my location? That means I'm moving from point A to point B. Alright, so living things are able to move. We can see the rabbit, it is hopping. We can see the leopard, it is actually running after its prey. And of course, the horse is galloping. All these things are forms of movement. Running, swimming, walking, these are all forms of movement. Why do living things move? Why the need for movement? Living things move in search of food. I don't think living things will start a sport and then the food comes to them. No, either they go in search of the food or they go to hunt. They must always search for their food so they don't starve. Living things also move in search of homes or habitats. A habitat is the home of an organism. So, living things also move in search of a conducive habitat to live. Living things also move to escape from danger or what we call predators. Predators are strong, bigger organisms that hunt and kill smaller ones. The smaller ones serve as food to the predators. So when the prey, the smaller organism being eaten by the predator, when they see a predator, they try to run as fast as their legs can carry them to the opposite direction. And that means they're actually moving or running away from danger. And then the predator, the bigger one, the carnivore, will actually chase after that. The chase is also a form of movement. It is chasing because it is hunting, it is searching for food. So we also search for food, we also escape from danger. And also living things need to move. They need to move in search of mates. That means the male organism, the male living thing has to move and search for the female organism so that they can give birth to young one that looks like them. All these things are reasons why living things actually move. All right, we'll move over to the next one, respiration. Respiration is not new to any of us right now. Respiration is defined as the ability of a living thing to breathe in and out. Respiration can also be said to be the exchange of gases between living things and their environment. You recall that the environment is the immediate surrounding of an organism. I know I've been mentioning organism. Whenever I mention organism, I'm simply referring to plants and animals. So living things need to actually exchange gases with its environment. So what are these gases? Is exchanges. Living things taking oxygen during respiration and they exhale or they give out carbon dioxide. Living things taking oxygen and they give out carbon dioxide during respiration. The next one in Mr. Niger call is N, and the N stands for nutrition. If you don't want to call it nutrition, you call it feeding. Now, nutrition is the ability of living things to take in food. Living things need food for various reasons. One of these reasons is for growth. Food is the basis for growth. Without food, living things will not grow well. Also, food is needed to replace some worn-out tissues. All right, now, some animals feed on grasses. Animals that feed or eat grasses are called herbivores. Herbivores are animals that eat grasses. For example, the cow is feeding on the grasses. We also have animals that feed on other animals, animals that eat other animals. We call these ones carnivores or flesh-eating animals. Carnivores, they eat other animals. We actually saw the leopard when we talked about movement. All right, we also have animals that eat both plants and other animals. We call this one omnivores. For example, man. All right, so nutrition is the ability of organisms to take in food, and I said the food is very necessary for growth and development, and it's also necessary for better functioning of parts of the body. All right, let's move on to the next one. We have irritability or sensitivity. The ability of living things to feel is simply referred to as irritability. Living things are expected to actually respond to changes in their environment. These timely responses to changes in their environment helps them to actually stay safe, helps them to escape injury, and helps them to live longer. For example, the little girl, you can see that she actually pricked her finger. This was because she might have accidentally placed her hand where the cactus is. Now, when it pricked her finger, you will realize that she will immediately withdraw her hand. This is because at that point in time, she will suddenly feel pain, and her natural response is to withdraw her hand from that source of pain. Also, when we feel cold, we tend to wear more jackets or sweaters. We tend to close the doors and the windows so that we can feel warm, or we go close to a fire. When we feel hot, when we feel the heat, we simply open up all the windows, or we simply turn on the cooling system, or we take off the many clothes we are wearing. These are some examples of our responses to changes in our environment, and this is a characteristic of organism known as irritability. All right, let's move on to the next characteristic, and that is growth. Growth is defined as a permanent increase in cell number and size. Of course, the size you were when you were in basic 1 is quite different from the size you are now in JSS1. You can see the difference in your size. You've grown over the years. The clothes you used to wear when you were in kindergarten you can't even fit into it right now because of growth. And of course, we said good food is what helps us to grow. And of course, I said permanent increase. That means when we increase in height, we cannot actually become shorter. You either remain there or you grow taller. It is permanent, and all living things grow. All right, the next characteristic of living thing is excretion. Excretion is defined as the ability of living things to pass out waste. Due to the activities of living things, they produce waste on a daily basis. And if these waste products or these materials are left to accumulate in the body of living things, they will actually stop some important processes. They will hinder some important processes, and this will cause harm to that organism. So there is need for these waste products to be eliminated or removed from the body, because their accumulation is actually toxic or poisonous. So living things actually have organs that are in charge of removing this waste. Some of these organs are your kidneys, some your skin, and others. Remember, excretion is very important, because if waste products are allowed to remain in the body, they will actually cause harm to the normal functioning of the body. The next characteristic is reproduction. Reproduction is the ability of living things to give rise to their young ones which look like them. The importance of reproduction is it ensures that life continues. It ensures the continuity of life. If the domestic fowls stop reproducing, and then all the domestic fowls have been eaten up, that means we no longer have domestic fowls for our celebrations. But because they keep giving rise or birth to new ones, the new ones hatch from the egg, grow to the adults actually give birth to new ones. We always have a continuous supply of these organisms. There are some organisms that are no longer available on the planet, and we call those ones extinct species or extinct organisms. And of course, reproduction ensures that organisms do not go into extinction. That is one importance. And of course, one thing about reproduction is that the adults or the parents give birth to young ones that resemble them. The young ones look like the parents. All right, let's go to the next characteristic, and that is competition. We are now getting to the call, C-A-L-L, the C for competition. Now, competition is the struggle between organisms for scarce resources. The struggle between organisms for scarce resources. Why would organisms actually struggle? Because resources that are important to them, resources around them are not enough. For example, organisms struggle for food because the food is not in abundance. They struggle for space because there's not enough space for all of them. Some organisms also struggle for light. Plants that are capable of producing their own food, they struggle for light. Also, organisms also struggle for mates for the purpose of reproduction. Only the strong ones will win the struggle and the weaker ones will be left with nothing. And I said the essence of competition is because resources are not in abundance. Since resources are scarce, living things need to struggle for it. If you look at, you can see that the two dogs are actually fighting for the dead organism. Now they are fighting for food. If the food was in abundance, they would not struggle. They would not fight within themselves. All right, let's move to the next characteristic, and that is adaptation. Adaptation. Living things have the ability to adjust to changes in their environment so as to be comfortable. The ability to adjust. The environment is constantly changing, and if a living thing is not able to adjust to these changes, it will die off. So living things are continuously adapting to their environment. Of course, the fin in the fish is used for movement in water. The scales help to prevent or protect the fish from injury and diseases. The gills is used by the fish for respiration, and of course the tail of the fish is used to propel the fish forward. Now we also have other forms of adaptation in which some bodies of the skin of an organism is colored to actually suit its surrounding, and that's one we call it camouflage. This helps it to actually conceal it from predators or prey. Of course, we also have some adaptation in which the organisms actually resemble another organism or thing that is actually not palatable. So at the end of the day, because it resembles something that is not tasty, other organisms will actually avoid it. They will not feed on it. There are various examples of adaptation. All right, let's move on to the next characteristic, which is limited size. Living things have definite sizes. The mouse, no matter how long it lives, no matter what it feeds on, no matter what you feed it, it cannot grow to the size of an elephant. The lizard, no matter how long it lives, no matter what it actually feeds on, it cannot grow to the size of a crocodile. This is because living things have definite sizes. Man, no matter how long he lives, no matter what he feeds, he will not grow to the size of a skyscraper because that is not his definite size. We'll go to the last characteristic of living thing, which is lifespan. All living things must die because they have a limited lifespan. Living things must die. And when they die, they become non-living things. From birth through their stages of growth and development, and then death. That does not mean that all living things must follow the definite pattern. An organism can die at birth. An organism might still go through the various stages of growth and come to old age and die. But living things must die. All right. Since we've been learning about living and non-living things, and we've talked about all the characteristics of living things. Bear in mind that I said for us to actually classify something as living, it must possess or it must have all the features or characteristics of living things. It must have all. So bearing that in mind and looking at the chart in front of us, can we identify some living and non-living things there? Of course we can. If we look at the teddy bear, will you say it's a living thing? Does it move on its own? Does it have limbs or legs to move? Does it breathe in and out? Does it eat? Does it give birth to young ones that look like it? If you are looking at this, of course, the obvious answer is no. So you can say with all confidence that the teddy bear is a non-living thing. Now, if we look at the ball, is it a living or non-living thing? Wow. Does the ball eat? Capital letter, no. Does it move on its own? No. Does it struggle with other organisms for space, mates? No. Does it breathe in and out? No. Does it get rid of waste products from its body? No. All these things actually shows that the ball does not possess any characteristic of living things, so it is non-living, and that is how you go through the diagrams, trying to identify the living and the non-living. Now we look at the bird. Of course, the bird can move. It can fly from one place to the other. Of course, bird can eat. The bird can actually give birth to young ones that looks like it. All this and more actually makes the bird possess all the characteristics of living things. And of course, the bird can be said to be an example of a living thing. Likewise, the frog, the zebra, the crocodile, the tree, the fish, the dragonfly, of course. All right. Let's move on to the differences between plants and animals. Plants and animals are examples of living things. Although plants and animals have some similarities, but they also have their differences. Now, one of the differences between plants and animals is that plants are generally rooted in one place, while most animals have the ability to move freely. If you look at the plants, the trees, they have roots which anchor them, which keep them firmly in the soil, so they do not actually move from one place to the other. But most animals, like the dogs, like the cats, you can see that they can actually use their organs of locomotion, like their limbs, to move from one place to the other. So plants are rooted to a spot. They are anchored to the soil, so they cannot move from one place to the other. But animals move freely using their limbs. All right, plants can make their own food. Most plants possess chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the pigment that is found in the chloroplast. All these things are found in the cell of a plant. Now, plants, because they possess chlorophyll, they are able to produce their own food. What do plants need to produce their own food? Of course, plants will actually need carbon dioxide and water, which are known as inorganic substances. And they also need sunlight. So carbon dioxide and water, the presence of sunlight, using chlorophyll, plants can produce their own food. But animals cannot produce or make their own food. So how do they survive? Will they starve? No. Some animals depend directly on plants. Depend directly on plants means they feed on grasses or they feed on leaves. And I mentioned earlier that animals that feed on grasses or leaves, animals that eat plants, are called herbivores. They are called herbivores. And then we have animals that feed or eat other animals. And these ones, we refer to them as carnivores. Carnivores are flesh-eating animals. They eat other animals. All right. The third difference between plants and animals is that plant cells have cell walls. Plant cells have cell walls. Like I said, all living things actually have cells. The cell is the smallest unit of life, the basic unit of life. Now, the cell wall actually gives the plant cells shape. It actually makes the plant cells to be strong. Animal cells do not have cell walls. That is a major difference between plant and animal cells. Plant cells have cell walls, while animal cells do not have cell walls. The next difference between plants and animals is that the plants have no or very basic ability to sense. That means they do not have well-developed sense organs, while the animals have much more highly developed sensory and nervous system. And because they have much more highly developed sensory and nervous system, they can respond to stimuli in the environment. They have a quicker response time to stimuli in the environment, while plants have a slower response to stimuli in the environment. All right, we've looked at plants and animals, their differences. We've looked at what living things are and some examples of living things. Now, what are the importance of living things? One importance of living things is plants and animals serve as sources of food. Plants and animals serve as sources of food. How? The animals, we have cow, we have goat, we have sheep. We actually use them as sources of meat, protein. Plants, of course, if I ask you to mention some plants that you use as food, of course, there are a lot of them. We actually feed on plants. Now, we also get wood from plants, which we can use for building and construction. There are some animals which serve as protection for man and his properties, and those animals. An example is dog. Security dogs are used to offer protection to man and his properties. Now, some products of animals are used in manufacturing industries to give rise to finished products. For example, milk gotten from cow, goat are used in manufacturing industries. Also, the skin of animals could also be used to make clothes, shoes. All right. Plants are also used to beautify our environment. When we plant flowers, these flowers are attractive and they make our environment very, very beautiful. While some animals, such as horses and donkeys, they serve as means of transportation. Some animals, such as donkeys and horses, serve as means of transportation. While some animals are also called beasts of burden. Yes, beasts of burden. They are used to move farm produce or products and humans from one place to the other. We also have an importance of living things. Plants and animals serve as source of revenue to farmers. After harvest, farmers actually sell their farm produce. If it's yam, if it's vegetable, if it's okra, pepper, they actually sell it, and then the final consumers pay them, and the farmers use the money. Some animals serve as means of transportation. Now, of course, the donkeys and the horses, they actually used to transport or to move human beings or farm produce from the farm to the market to the storage place, are actually human beings from one place to the other. So some animals serve as means of transportation, serve as beasts of burden. We also have another importance of living things, and that is plants and animals serve as source of revenue to farmers. Plants and animals serve as source of revenue to farmers. And we said farmers actually sell the harvested plants, and they are paid in cash, which they use to settle other immediate needs. Also, animals or parts of animals are actually sold by the farmers that rear them, and of course they actually paid, and these farmers use the money to settle other needs. We also have commercial agriculture, in which farmers use machines. They actually farm in a large area, and of course what they plant is what we call cash crops like cocoa and the rest of them. And after harvesting, they sell these cash crops in exchange for money. So plants and animals serve as source of revenue to farmers. Alright, we've come to the end of the lesson. But before we go, do a quick recap of what we've done, and then we'll move straight to our exam guide and attempt some questions on what we just learned. Alright, we told you the meaning of living things, and we said living things are those things that have life in them. And we gave some examples mentioning the goats, the trees, man. Basically, we are talking about plants and animals as examples of living things. We went further to look at non-living things. We said non-living things are those things that do not have life in them. That means they do not possess the characteristics of living things. And we gave some examples like the laptop, the pen, the chair. And we went further to talk about characteristics of living things, and we said we actually used the mnemonics to quickly remember them. And the mnemonics we actually used was Mr. Ninja Call, Mr. Ninja Call. And then from there we talked about the characteristics of living things, from movement down to lifespan. And of course, we looked at the differences between plants and animals. Why plants can not move from one place to the other because they are rooted to the ground. Animals can use their limbs to move. Plants can produce their own food, animals cannot. Then we went further to talk about the importance of living things, of course. Then we ended it with plants and animals as sources of food. Wood gotten from plants is used in building and construction. Dogs serve as protection. And then some products of animals like their skin, their hide, their horn, milk are used in manufacturing industries. And then some plants are actually used to beautify our environment. They are very beautiful, so when we plant them, they make the environment very attractive. While some animals are beasts of burden. And of course, plants and animals serve as a source of revenue to farmers. So let's go straight to our exam guide. Alright, we have a question from our exam guide, and the question is, animals that feed on only plants are called. Animals that feed on only plants are called, and the options are A, cannibals, A, cannibals, B, carnivores, B, carnivores, C, herbivores, C, herbivores, D, omnivores, D, omnivores, and E, scavengers, E, scavengers. From our lesson, we can say that animals that feed on only plants are called herbivores. That's option C. So if you picked option C, you are correct. Alright, from our lesson, when I mentioned the characteristics of life, there's a question that we actually have from our exam guide, and the question is, the basic unit of life is, first, option A is cell, option B, organ, option C, organism, option D, system, and option E, tissue. Cell, organ, organism, system, and tissue. From our lesson today, I mentioned that the cell is the basic unit of life. Cell is the basic unit of life. So the answer is A. The following are characteristics of living things except A. Excretion, B. Expansion, C. Growth, D. Reproduction, E. Respiration. The following are characteristics of living things except, if you remember Mr. Ninja Call, you will realize that the excretion, growth, reproduction, and respiration are all characteristics of living things. So the odd one there is expansion. So the following are characteristics of living things except expansion. That is option B. The next question from my exam guide is, herbivorous animals feed on. Herbivorous animals feed on. Option A, decayed matter. Option A, decayed matter. B, flesh only. C, plants only. D, plant and animal. E, sewage materials. Herbivorous animals feed on. From our lesson, C is the correct answer, and C says plants only. Herbivorous animals feed on plants only. That is the correct answer. So what about the ones that feed on flesh only? We have a name for it. From the lesson, we know that it's carnivorous animals. And then the ones that feed on plants and animals, from the lesson, we understood that those ones are called omnivores. Right. When we were mentioning the characteristics of living things, we came across something like this. The place where an organism lives is called, we have A, biome, B, community, C, environment, D, habitat, E, niche. The place where an organism lives is called its, of course, you know its habitat. We mention habitat as the place where an organism lives, its natural home.